Hello and welcome to the Buy, Sell, Hold Spotlight presented by Sports Car Market Magazine. I'm Darren Roberge. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Also be sure to join in the conversation and share your thoughts by leaving us a comment below. Our guest today is artist David Townsend. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me.
For those who may not be familiar with you, why don't you give us a little bit of background?
I draw a lot of cars and I don't know, it's been drawing. This is sort of my retirement project. I sold an agency, a creative agency to kind of get back to where I started, which was illustration. So, if we count grade school, and rendering Big Daddy Roth cartoons, I've been drawing, probably since the fourth grade. Yeah. And it kind of took off. I didn't really expect it to. It was more of a project for me and something I've been wanting to do, get back to illustrating and doing things I really enjoyed. And I started selling stuff and just kind of got out of hand. So here we are.
Well, let's talk your foundations here. Formal training, like what initially brought you to cars? Like kind of how did you get to where you are right now? And what was the path that you took to arrive there?
I started actually formal art lessons when I was 7. So, and I continued those until I was about 14 years old. And then cars, girls, growing up in Southern California, it took over. And, working on, I kept my hand in. Cars was, really working with my dad in the garage when, as a preteen. And, I think probably 14 years old, I was pretty relentless about bugging him to get a car. And, so I really got my car roots cut when I was presented with a Morris Minor 1000 for my birthday, with the, engine out of the car, sitting in the back seat, a box of tools and a shop manual with the instructions of when you got it running, you could have it. And, I asked if I was going to get any help and I was told, well, no, this is yours. And it took me a little more than a year, but by the time I was eligible to get my permit, I had it running.
Well, your techniques are very, very unique and very recognizable. How did you arrive there, and what did it take to develop that sort of unique eye and style that you present with your artwork?
When this whole thing started, it was actually a commission piece. Gentleman who owns all of the photographs for the MGB GT that was cut in half. I think it's at the Heritage Museum. Asked me originally if I could composite the photos. And after a couple of days of working with them, called him and said, I didn't really think it was going to be worth the time, different angles, yada, yada. But I said, I thought it'd make a terrific drawing. And he said, that sounds great. We arrived at the price. I did the work. I kept printing rights. And, I said, gee, I see if there's any game in this. And, so I printed up 50 of them and I sold them within a few hours on some message boards. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And so I did another one and I sold those, but there really wasn't any style to it. I was basically mimicking what I had seen. And I thought, gee, if I'm going to really keep doing this, I'd like it to be artful. And, I started, and I'm, real well acquainted with the cutaway artists that occur in our country and in Japan. There's quite a lot of them. And I didn't really think I had anything to offer in terms of, being new. Like, they were doing pretty good work and I was doing some research on it and I found this really obscure German guy who was doing some work similar. And, he shows up a couple times and then vanishes. It's the only thing I've ever seen the guy do. But I thought it was a really cool style. And so I started working with it and it's taken about 10 years to get it from where it started to where it is now.
Well, your drawings are very technically proficient, and there's a lot of exact detail involved. So when you're picking out a car to do, like, what angle do you take from that standpoint? What kind of research is involved? Like, how do you go from an idea to actual finished product?
There's about 150 hours involved in creating the artwork. About 25% of that is hardcore research, web, books. In some cases, when I was working with Jerry Coker on the Healey's, it's the actual people who designed the cars. And that's part of the motivation to do this. I mean, the people who are responsible for a lot of the cars that we see as seminal or iconic are dying or they're dead. And when they go, whatever they know about them goes with them. And if at some point we don't work to begin to preserve some of that knowledge, it's gone forever. And I think that those stories of those people have important things to teach us, whether that's perseverance or take a chance, try something, aim big.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, it's enormously important stuff to try to preserve that. And you're absolutely right. As the generations pass, we aren't documenting things, I think, as well as we probably need to in order to keep these things going for the future. So that kind of stuff is certainly incredibly important. So
yeah,
you're a British car aficionado, more or less. You do a lot with British cars.
Guilty as charged.
Sort of, yes. So what has been your favorite car that you have done up to this point?
British or otherwise? Or just
anything, you tell me.
It's like asking to pick which one of my kids is great, you know. I'd probably say that the 240Z that I did recently, you know, almost all the cars I draw have stories behind them. Most of them have some personal connection. And I first saw that car in a neighbor's driveway the year before it was introduced. I grew up in Riverside, California. My neighbor was a track steward, and I worked for him, and I showed up to work one day, and the car was sitting in the driveway. And it was being given away as a gift to the race winner for that weekend. I don't know whether it was the Times Grand Prix, but one of the big events. And I just remember seeing this incredible car, you know, for the very first time. And I thought, you know, it's just one of those things, you know, I love story. I thought it was a great car. I've always wanted to draw it, and, finally had that chance. So I guess that's probably my favorite to date. You know, a lot of it has to do with the development of technique. What I draw today doesn't resemble what I drew 5 years ago or what I drew 10 years ago. And what I draw tomorrow won't look exactly like it does now. You know, every time you're in the studio, it's an experiment. Every day is an experiment. You're looking, you know, you learn something new about something you've done 1,000 times. You try it differently and it works differently, works better. And you keep moving forward. So when you ask me what my favorite car is, it's most likely to be the last thing I drew because it's sort of, you know, it's always the culmination of whatever you're working on.
So is there a certain car that you haven't done yet that's kind of nagging at you or weighing heavy on your mind? And why haven't you done that car yet?
I currently have a 2.5 year draw list. So there's lots of cars I haven't drawn yet that I'm waiting to draw. And, and they're all favorites. I'm not trying to be cute or glib here, but they're all favorites. Every car brings a different story, different tale, has something different to show you. Maybe it's its competition history, or maybe it's the story of how it was developed, or, we forget in today's culture of cars that a lot of these things, people invested every nickel they had in creating something that we've sort of lost the romance of it, I guess is the gist of it. We've lost the romance. And I think there's a lot in those stories. There's some cool stories out there about the way cars got developed, why they got developed. One of my all-time favorites are the late Healey Le Mans cars. After Healey goes out of business, Donald keeps the factory, decides to go back to Le Mans. And this is really a tale of men in sheds. He builds his car up and ships it over to Le Mans, has to trailer it to the track. They don't have haulers or any of that gizmo stuff. And the car doesn't do particularly well. But he doesn't stop. He goes back the next year and they changed the rules and they said you can't have, it has to be an open car. He cuts the top off and rebuilds the car and goes back. And you just can't imagine doing that today. Where you get a guy like that is just so driven to try to reestablish racing, British racing at this classic. And he's up against teams with enormous budgets and all kinds of, technical help. And he's literally trailering cars to the track. It's a great story. And I think it's one worth remembering. It's one worth telling.
Yeah, no, it's certainly inspiring for sure. And if you think about a Formula One season is 200, 350 million, somewhere in that general area to run per year. Imagine somebody like him walking onto, the track at Monaco or something along those lines with a shed built vehicle and trying to make it work. You just couldn't do it today. And you think about the monumental amount of courage and work. These guys were real gladiators, not only on the track, but sort of in the business office as well. And these are stories that are important that should be kept around for generations to be inspired by.
I agree. Part of the reason the draw, it's a way to visually recount, that story and to preserve the heritage. And, I know on your list is the Group 44 cars, and that's a great example of, a heritage in racing that's absolutely worth remembering. I mean, my first exposure to Group 44 was the TSOA newsletter, Triumph Sports Owners Association. My dad owned a TR3 early in, that's the car I learned to drive in. And, and I read about these guys. And as I started to draw the cars, I was fortunate in running into some people that had actually worked for the team. So I had great technical help. And they're just, you look at that story and that competition, you think about what Tullius brings into the game. I mean, he is literally the father of modern sponsorship. Now, it's where it all got started, for good or for worse. That he changed the face of sports car racing.
Yeah, I really love that series that you did. It's probably my favorite, but you have a handful of other series that you put together too. But I got to ask though first, what inspires you to put together a series? I mean, you have several of them that you've presented. So what makes you do groups of cars versus just singular automobiles?
I'm obsessive. I kind of got, you kind of draw one, it leads you to another one. I wouldn't say any of the series were actually intentional except for competition colors. The latest Shadow and Light stuff actually started off as a Friday experiment. Every Friday is my play day. I sit down and I try crazy stuff that I've just never tried before. I wanted to try. And one of the things I wanted to experiment with was lighting the cars differently and, to try to get a little bit more drama and see what that did. And I think the first one I did was the GT350R. And I was really happy with the result. And I went, let me try another one. And then I have 10 of them. So what do you do with that? And so I kind of put them into a collection. And it's kind of how all of them start, really. They start with one car that kind of leads you down the trail to another one. the inspiration for all of these is kind of a sort. I don't want to sound too zen. Being able to let go of what you know in favor of what you might discover is really what drives you to the next car. You have to be willing to say, okay, what I did then was great, but that doesn't really have anything to do with what I might do, tomorrow, the next day. And because, you do it that way, then, every car presents a different set of challenges and, you just sort of follow the thread. It's really a very freewheeling thing. You kind of have to follow you got to follow your intuition and what you like.
Yeah, no, and there's some really fascinating stuff between the different collections as well that really set everything apart. So kind of give a little quick rundown of a couple of them and explain what's different between each collection.
Well, Competition Colors started off as an idea for a book. And I was looking at a lot of the cars that I had and looking for sort of a common theme. And if you know enough about racing history back in the day, racing was much more of a national sport. You had German teams and British teams and et cetera. And when FIA gets started, they actually assign international colors. So, the American cars are white and, the Italian cars are red, the German cars are silver and such and such and such and such. So that became Competition Colors idea. And, I started, like I said, it was the idea for a book originally, still is. And, I just sort of started working on that and playing with the idea. Again, you just pick the rock up and you roll it over and you keep rolling it over and you keep rolling it over and stuff shows up. Yep. And in Shadow and Light, as I said, was really started as this experiment in different views of, different ways to light the car. As I'm going through it, the Group 44 thing's pretty self-explanatory, I got one and I think the TR4 was the first one. And then I got asked to do the TR4A and then pretty soon it was the TR6. And as people saw the art, people that owned the cars would get a hold of me to draw the next one. And I think I've drawn most of them, except I haven't done the MGB or the GT6 yet. But they're on the way. I'll finish the series out at some point, but that's kind of how they all get going. I get kind of hooked into a groove on a car and I want to do more of them. The Shadow and Light thing is turning into sort of 60s and 70s prototypes for, that's sort of just where it headed.
It's interesting that these things take a life of their own. You mentioned a book, but you have a book. It's called Portfolio. Why don't you tell us about that?
That started as something else as well. I was asked to assemble, I was actually on a podcast and I was asked what my 10 favorite cars were, 10 favorite drawings. And so we went through the podcast thing and I generally keep notes, for these things. So I wrote them down and I thought, well, hey, that's a pretty cool idea, and I never really collected my work. There's 170 cars in my catalog. So there's a lot of stuff and, culling it down and then trying to find some sort of, narrative that would cut across everything, was a little bit of work, but that's how Portfolio started was, kind of this idea. And, then it became a book and I sold them all.
The good thing to do indeed. Another piece of significant recognition that you have received is from the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum's Nation of Speed exhibit.
Indeed.
That's a big deal. Why don't you tell us about that, kind of run that down, what that is, and what you contributed?
Okay. Well, Nation of Speed is a new exhibit at National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. The curator is a man named Jeremy Kinney. He's also associate director at the museum. And it got started pre-pandemic. And it started with a peculiar phone call from a very nice woman named Caroline in the UK who called this obscure artist in Vermont and said, gee, we'd like to license this image of this TR4A for this new Smithsonian exhibit, yada, yada, yada. And I'm already thinking which one of my friends is pranking me. So I'm not thinking the call's real. But I listened and said, if you'd like to email the information request, I'll send it on to my intellectual property attorney and we'll see what we can do, which is true. I wasn't BSing her, and, hung up and thought, well, I'm going to find that rat, whoever did this. And about 5 minutes later, I got an email. I was like, okay. And we struck a deal, and the project got delayed because of COVID, and it finally gets put together, and it'll be there for 10 years, by the way. So if you want to go see it, and it's a 7/8 version of my TR4A print, is part of a exhibit called Speed Shop, where you can actually go up and change the wheel on the car and whatnot. So it's kind of semi-interactive. It's pretty crazy. It's a crazy experience. I certainly never expected to have anything there. And I always wondered, how did they find me? And of course, the mystery is finally solved when I happen to chase down Mr. Kinney and find out that he's a member of several Triumph sites. So apparently, Jeremy put the suggestion in the designer's ear that this would be a great car. And that's how it ended up. So I end up in the Smithsonian Museum.
Pretty amazing. Amazing honor, most definitely. You get around to the show circuit pretty regularly too. You want to talk about any upcoming appearances that you are making?
I am at Greenwich in about a week, actually. I'll be at the Greenwich Concourse. I'm there for a couple days. Then I do a small local show up here, and then I think I close out the year at Lime Rock Historics this year. I'll be down there for I think 4 days.
Okay, David, you're a lifelong car guy. You're out there doing car stuff all the time. So why don't you give us one car to buy, one car to sell, and one car to hold in today's marketplace?
Okay. I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I watch your podcast. Everybody kind of names specific cars, and I'm going to kind of take a more holistic view on this. One of the challenges we face with cars and sports cars and whatnot is trying to get younger blood into our hobby or our sport. And I think that comes down to accessibility. Early in the podcast, when I started out buying British cars when I was very young, it was because they were plentiful and cheap. And I think that is a good nugget to hold on to here. So my advice on buying, targeted really at people just getting into the game, would be buy something you think you're going to drive, that you're going to enjoy and have fun with and be enthusiastic about. Don't worry about what kind of return you might get on your investment, because there are a lot of great starter cars out there that you can get into for less than $7,500. A Fiat 124 or a Corvette C3 or C4 or a late model MGB with rubber bumpers that you can spend a couple grand on and put chrome bumpers on it. Great cars to get started in that you can enjoy and be enthusiastic about. That's kind of my advice on buy. On sell, and this will go to everybody that's been in the game for a while. We've all had those cars, the project car that sits there hasn't been touched in 4 years, or the car we thought we were going to drive the wheels off of that's still parked in the same spot that we brought it home in. Those cars, sell them. Sell those cars and let somebody who's going to be enthusiastic about them, who's going to complete your project, who's going to drive that car, who's going to love the car, give them a chance. It's a great opportunity. And trade's kind of a similar advice. If you got one of those cars, trade it for something you're going to enjoy. Trade it for something you're going to drive. Trade it for something you're going to work on. But to me, this is a participatory sport. You drive them, you work on them, you restore them. You know, they're part of the whole legacy of these cars goes away when we park them in museums and we make them so they're, you don't play with them. One of the things I love about Simeone and Revs is they get out and exercise these cars. And that's what we should be doing. That's the whole point of it. You can't, locking them away in your barn or your garage or whatever doesn't make any sense. That's not honoring the legacy of the people who dreamed them up, who built them, who raced them. And at the end of the day, to me, that's the essence of what we do.
Yeah, stuff. I agree completely. I mean, buy the cars that get you in, sell the cars you're not using, and don't hold anything, trade it or get rid of it if you're not going to enjoy it. Good stuff indeed. Any final thoughts?
My final thoughts are going to be, we don't really own these things. We're stewards, or we should look at ourselves as stewards of these cars. These cars were somebody else's dreams, somebody else's trials, somebody else's work. And our job is less to own them and more to take care of them, to nurture them, to keep them going, and ultimately to hand them down to the next person whose job is the same thing. So I see it less as, I see the idea of being in cars less as owning them and more as caring for them. And so those would be my kind of final thoughts, is to approach this from a stewardship point of view. And you'll have more fun at it.
It's an interesting point, and it's something I think about a lot when I'm walking through collections and so on, is the fact that these cars are still here and that they exist at all in the first place, aren't rusted away in some junkyard someplace, says that these were special to somebody at one point. These were cars that people did first dates and marriages and proms, and they took kids home from the hospital in, and they sat in the garage and they spent hours with their families restoring and enjoying and going to shows and traveling. I think the stewardship element does to a degree somewhat get lost sometimes on the basis of the investment side of things. But ultimately, that's what these are special cars, special things that were pieces of people's lives that have now been transferred onto somebody else. And it is our responsibility to continue to maintain those on behalf of the people that started that ball rolling.
Yeah.
So that's certainly a great way to approach this. And I couldn't agree more. So where can people go to learn more?
Sportscar.com. The website is always available, and I'm pretty regular on Facebook. I'm up there usually 2-3 times a week. Almost always announce new drawings, where I'm going to be, that kind of stuff. So those are the two best ways. I'm not as aggressive on the other social media as I probably ought to be, but, I'd rather be spending my time drawing cars. So you can get a hold of me. Yeah. Or see me at a show. The show schedule's up on the website. So
definitely worth visiting the website. Lots of samples of stuff that you can see and check out. And your work is truly exceptional. I would like to thank David Townsend for joining us today. To learn more about anything that we discussed here, be sure to pick up the latest issue of Sports Car Market Magazine by visiting the link in the video description down below. As a reminder, if you enjoyed this content, please take a moment to like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay on top of future episodes. I'm Daryl Roberge, and thank you for joining us on the Buy, Sell, Hold Spotlight.